Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the first quarterly webinar hosted by DataStream here. We've had a great turnout, and so we are going to go ahead and turn this into, a quarterly webinar. So excited to have everybody here in on the first one. We've got a good group, it looks like. Just going to give it another minute or so, just to let any kind of stragglers, trickle in here before we officially get started. But as we're going through, I wanted to start out by saying, if you have any questions at all as we're going through, don't hesitate to go ahead and drop them in the chat at any time. That way you don't forget your question or anything like that. And as we're going through the webinar, if I notice it and it's really pertinent to what I'm talking about, I might go ahead and just incorporate it as I'm discussing. Otherwise, I'm going to also save them for the end as well, and I'll make sure to go through all of the questions at the end there as well. Make sure that we answer them all. I'm a big fan of making sure we have a good chunk of time at the end for Q&A. So make sure to drop in any questions that you have. But we'll go ahead, and I think we'll go ahead and dive right in. Today's topic is going to be how to use the current requirements that we're seeing in the cyber insurance space to help drive current IT security sales. This is a topic that I'm sure is on a lot of your minds if you're joining here today. It's something that is very important to us. It's a reason that we saw, or excuse me, one of the reasons that we saw a need for a company like DataStream to come into the space and really come in as an expert and start connecting the dots between the IT, the technology side, right? Really your guys' main focus, and the insurance side of things. And that's really where we come into play. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. And I want to start this topic by first giving a bit of an overview of the insurance side of things and where it's kind of come from. Some of this may be familiar to some of you guys there in the audience, but some of this is going to be new for some of the folks. Absolutely, I promise everybody is going to walk away today learning something new. But for those of you, some of this might look slightly familiar. Uh, Insurance has been a driver for change in the past, and cyber insurance is really no different. When we think about things like the automotive space or property, we think about the tools and the technologies in those industries that ultimately help mitigate risk. The things like seat belts, airbags, right? Your smoke alarms, your smoke detectors on the property side of things. Well, insurance has been the ones really driving compliancy in those spaces for decades, right? And cyber insurance and the requirements that we're seeing pop up are really no different, right? Insurance has really been that driver for a long, long time, right? If we think about the folks slamming cars, testing the safety features of cars, slamming them into walls, seeing which are the safest, those are the insurance companies that are actually doing that. Now, what does today's cyber insurance market look like, though? Because it is a little bit different than your other typical your other typical insurance markets. Mainly that the market is not standardized right now. So, all of the carriers out there are actually technically a little different from all the other carriers. Obviously, there are some crossover and some similarities, but technically, all of these carriers you're seeing are slightly different from each other in terms of both what they're offering coverage, what their cost to obtain that coverage looks like, as well as what the requirements to obtain that coverage look like. And so, what we've seen develop is a bit of a tiered system, right? You got all of these carriers out there kind of offering their kind of own version of cyber insurance. And at the top of this list are what we would kind of refer to as the gold star carriers or the better carriers, the ones truly focused on cyber insurance and are the ones offering the better policies at the better pricing, but also naturally have more of the cybersecurity requirements to obtain it, right? While other carriers out there, they may have fewer requirements, but they are going to be, sacrificing one of those other two areas, right? Whether it's lacking full coverage or the cost to obtain it ends up going drastically high, right? So I set all this up to give you an idea of how the customer is going to need to navigate the cyber insurance space, right? So it's really a balance between these things, right? The coverage versus the requirements versus the cost. So, talking about coverage first, what does a cyber insurance policy, what does good coverage look like from those kind of gold star carriers, right? The ones offering the best policies out there. Well, they're going to include both first and third party coverages, right? So, incidents that are going to affect anything directly to you, right? That's your first party coverage. Third party coverage is going to include coverages and damages that might happen to customers or vendors connected to you, right? So, an incident that trickles through you and ends up affecting maybe one of your customers, another vendor, somebody connected to you, and ultimately the blame ends up coming back onto you. So, a good coverage is going to have both first and third party coverage. Under that, this is going to include coverages like data breaches, your business interruption, your cyber extortion, and your cyber crime, right? So, this is going to be what we would like to refer to as a broad cyber insurance policy and what that looks like. But as mentioned, every carrier is slightly different. So as you kind of move away from those gold star carriers, what you start seeing is areas of these coverages will start dropping, right? Maybe it doesn't include any third party coverage. That's actually a pretty common one that we see as you move down this kind of list of carriers. Maybe it's dropping cyber extortion, right? So it's not going to cover ransomware damages. These are examples of as you move away from those kind of quote unquote gold star or the best carriers out there, what you start to see drop if as you move away from those, if they're sacrificing coverage, those are some of the common ones that you're starting to see drop. So that's the coverage. What does the pricing look like? So to give you an idea of what pricing looks like from the best, and again, the most common policy that is sold in the cyber insurance space at the moment is a $1 million policy. There's a couple reasons why, but a big one being the average cost of ransomware alone right now for the SMB space is sitting in between 250,000 and $300,000. And as you start to add in the other fees and damages that could occur during an incident, the $1 million policy has very quickly become the most common policy sold to the SMB space. So what you're seeing here in terms of numbers are going to be the averages for a $1 million policy. You can also think of them as per million. So as you move up, you can really start kind of doubling these numbers. But again, the most common policy for the S&B space being $1 million. Typically, it's going to be in between the 1.5 and $10,000 annually. I know this is a big kind of variation, and that's where the difference in industry and size can come in and play a major factor in this premium. That's actually going to be one of the largest things that a carrier is going to consider when a customer is initially applying. So I broach these numbers to really give you guys an idea of what a generally on average a good policy, what that range should look like. If you're running into customers with policies quite a bit higher than this, that's one of those gaps that I'm mentioning, right? Where you're sacrificing either your coverage or your costs or the requirements, right? And so if maybe they are offering good coverage, that's where you'll typically see an increase in the premiums, right? If they don't necessarily have as many of those requirements. So keeping an eye on the premiums. I just wanted to broach that subject, to kind of the topic, give you guys an idea on the back burner of what those policies typically look like in terms of pricing. If you're seeing, smaller companies in the $20,000 range, that's a big red flag, right? And a good reason to have that policy be reviewed by us. It's another reason we offer free policy reviews to all customers. It's another reason that your customers 50K, you might see it down here, these 50K to $250,000 riders, add-ons, or endorsements are really not going to cut it. We just talked about, ransomware, the average cost to the SMB space hitting that, 200, $300,000 level. So these little riders or add-ons that your customers currently have on top of their general liability or their business owner's policy, they're just not going to cut it. But not only that, but the language inside those policies is also typically really lacking. So the stigma around cyber insurance not paying out, one of the kind of avenues that stigma is coming down is out of these kind of add-ons or riders because the language inside of them is typically not very clear, not very explicit, and has the potential to leave loopholes and ways that the carriers can finagle their way out of even paying those riders or add-ons. So the language inside is incredibly important. And that actually brings up the pay on behalf policy discussion and a pay on behalf policy. So again, looking at the language inside these policies can be another differentiator between kind of the gold star carriers and those carriers down below. And both of these really lean into the argument of, well, how complicated do you want your claims process to be? Because a pay on behalf policy, often sold by these gold star guys, is actually going to pay for the cost of that incident as they are occurring. Most commonly, this is found on ransomware coverage because the carrier is going to come in and actually just pay for that ransom right then and there versus a reimbursement type policy, which means the customer comes up for the cost of the incident as it's occurring, and then they're kind of battling the carrier, for the for the foreseeable future, trying to get them to pay, to reimburse them for the damages. So obviously, we highly recommend looking into pay on behalf policies, which, as I mentioned, are going to be mainly offered by those gold star carriers. So I also wanted to touch on some of the requirements, just give you guys an idea of what the majority of these carriers are looking for. Again, unstandardized market. So technically all of these carriers, they have their own set of requirements that they're asking for. But these top five at least give you a strong access into a good portion of the market, right? MFA, data, specifically offline cloud backups, going to be incredibly important. EDR is a big one for unlocking the door, particularly to the better carriers out there, as well as password management and obviously awareness training, both popping up more and more on the carriers list. So these five are the kind of top big ones I like to broach, but we also have the full requirements checklist in our partner portal for you guys. If you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, and I'll touch it again on it at the end, but I would definitely jump into the partner portal, check out the resources section, and pull up this requirements checklist. We created this to educate both customers and partners alike to really hopefully in as simple way as we can outline what the requirements that these carriers are looking for and how they kind of map to the entire market. So again, unstandardized, so everybody's a little bit different and technically has their own set of requirements that they're asking for. But obviously there is some overlap, so we did our best to organize this. A good example I like to touch on is MFA, right? Turning on MFA is virtually a hard requirement across the board for all of the carriers, right? So that box is really going to need to be checked in order to even start obtaining quotes back. Now, in order to unlock the door to those better carriers, right, the gold star ones, you're also going to need to deploy an email protection solution, right? That's why we're recommending this one. It's not necessarily a absolute hard requirement because, as I mentioned, you can kind of move down the list and maybe find a carrier who doesn't have it as a hard requirement. But in order to unlock the doors to those better carriers who are offering better pricing, better coverage, they are requiring it, right? So it can be a useful tool, this checklist to kind of educate customers, show them that oftentimes the things, I'm sure some of you are noticing some of the tools on here that you've maybe been banging on their heads to get, for years, right? And suddenly you can kind of bring this as not only a way to show them what the carriers are asking for, but a third support, a third party support to the things that you have also been telling them that they need to get in place. Ideally, this is used to educate them even before they've gotten to the point where they're applying for insurance so that hopefully they have an understanding of what the carriers are going to need, and it'll reduce that back and forth with the carriers, right? Where the carriers come back saying, sorry, you don't have this in place. If you get this in place, we'll think about it. If we can get the customer to start understanding that and actually getting these in place beforehand, obviously helps speed that whole process up. So definitely jump in, take a look at what that full checklist actually looks like, get an understanding of what the carriers are looking for in terms of these tools and technologies. Obviously, specifically focusing on those that are the hard requirements, right? The ones that aren't necessarily required by all, but we do also want to know the difference between those, right? So if we're, sacrificing, not having an email protection solution, it means we're going to be closing the door to some of those carriers out there, right? And maybe not getting the absolute best options out there. So covering those three areas, I like to kind of frame it in a very common myth that I get, right? It's the most common thing I get when I am talking to new partners or customers alike, which is the myth that if I have better internal posture, or as I get better internal posture, the carriers will then offer me a discount on my premiums or my deductibles for cyber insurance, when in fact we are not seeing the individual carriers offer discounting. It's really all about close or open doors right now. We are heading in that direction, and we've started to see some carriers do it on a very low level. But across the board, most carriers are not offering discounting, and it is still very much based on industry. It's really a space that they're catching up on right now. So the example of a that I have for a carrier that I was working with recently, they did offer a customer about a 16% discount on their premiums for recently implementing MFA, but that is very specific on their industry. They were a law firm. And who's to say that if we go to another carrier with their same stack, they won't actually be offered an even better policy than that quote unquote 16% discount? So, as you can see, because of that unstandardized nature, it's also very difficult to try and quantify what that would look like. But it really comes down, as I mentioned, to open and close doors, and these three kind of, you can think of them as three areas, or features that you get to choose two of the three, in terms of kind of features of your policy, right? So as you're shopping for policies, you get to choose two of these three, right? You're either going to have fewer requirements, but that means you're going to be sacrificing one of the other two, right? So it means the coverage won't be as good, or the cost goes, through the roof, or vice versa, right? Obviously, for us, we're going to recommend finding great coverage at a low cost, which is going to mean more technological requirements. For us, that makes the most sense because it's also going to put the customer in a much more secure position. So when I'm explaining to customers and partners alike of how to navigate the cyber insurance space, this is how I'm breaking down for them, right? Yeah, we can go out there and maybe find a policy that isn't going to require as much from you, but are you willing to sacrifice the costs, or are you willing to sacrifice the coverage? We highly recommend not, because it's, especially during a cyber incident, you want very broad coverage. You want it to cover any sort of aspect of that incident that's going to occur. You want it to have very explicit language, right? So that during your claim, there's not this back and forth, this incredible battle with the carrier, right? Puts you in just a much better position to focus on, the other two and get better requirements in place, right? Unlock the door to low cost and good coverage by getting better requirements in place. So, this is exactly where our insurance application comes into play and why we incorporated a gap analysis directly into our insurance application. So, obviously, we created that checklist that we already went over to hopefully broach that subject with customers, get them understanding what they're going to need ahead of time. But if for whatever reason, you haven't had a chance to take a customer through that, or they're unwilling to listen, our application will also do the gap analysis depending on how their cybersecurity questions are answered. And so this way we can just further, we're all about redundancy in the cyber insurance world. So for those who already understand it, it's just kind of reiterating it. And obviously for those who haven't been educated on it, it's a great way to broach that subject, let them know, hey, before you actually click submit on your insurance application and we take this out to the rest of the market to apply for policies, these are the questions that we're are actually going to be looked at very harshly by the carriers and potentially will result in even a denial of quotes. They won't give you any quotes back, or will definitely affect your premiums, right? So we're going to broach that subject right as they're walking through the application itself. Our application is also very collaborative, so it's easy for you as a partner to kind of go in and assist them with filling out the the cybersecurity questions. It's something that more and more I am telling partners to assist with, because when a claim arises, the carriers are going to look at how that customer answered those security questions. And if there's any discrepancies between how they answered and how they're currently set up during the incident, that can also lead to a claims denial. So be very beneficial as a partner to assist them. It makes sense, obviously, to make these product recommendations. Benefit on your guys' side is pretty apparent. Obviously, helps hopefully get them across that line of understanding that they need these tools in place. The benefit to the applicant is we can get them access to more of the market, right? If we can get them to understand that getting these better posture in place opens up more of the market, it's going to lead to less expensive policies, right? And better coverage. And then obviously the benefit to DataStream means that we get to go out there and bring them the best policies back, right? We can bring the most competitive quotes by ensuring that they have as good internal posture as we can before going out to market. So all that to say, the going forward cyber risk strategy, and a way that I really like to break it down for customers, is pre and post incident, right? A good way to look at the kind of balance between cyber insurance and the IT partner and the tools and technologies and services that you guys offer is really pre and post incident. It's a common objection we still get to this day as well. If I have insurance, why do I need the tools? Or if I have the tools, why would I need the insurance? And this is how I break it down for partners and customers alike, right? Is it's all about the balance. And a great way to think of it is the tools and technologies are there to mitigate that risk, right? Really pre incident, to hopefully help avoid that incident from occurring, or at the very least, mitigate how severe that incident is. While the insurance is post incident, right? The incident's already occurred, right? It's already happened. Now what? And insurance is there to help bring you back post incident, right? And bring you up to speed post incident. It's really all about educating them on the holistic approach, right? Showing them that, hey, it's not just about the tools and technologies. In fact, for us, we believe a good way to think about it is the three-legged stool, right? A secure posture is the three-legged stool, and is a combination of the tools and technologies, the compliancy, legal side of things, and the insurance leg. And for a while, that insurance leg hasn't necessarily been playing super well with the other legs. And that's where we come in, and why we developed the tools we did to hopefully help you guys develop this more holistic approach to your customers, and incorporating all three of your legs into a strategy that makes sense to both you and the customer. And honestly, and by doing this, it makes you guys stickier, right? In long term, obviously makes you stand out from those partners that maybe aren't thinking about, things like cyber insurance and thinking about their cybersecurity holistically, but also protects you from, your customers potentially sneaking away to other partners who, or excuse me, other MSPs who might be doing those well, right? So making yourself stickier, making yourself the one-stop shop. Another thing I often hear from my partners is, more and more customers are viewing them as the one-stop shop, and ideally, that's what they want, right? The customer wants that kind of trusted IT person that just they lean on for all IT stuff, right? And so incorporating the cyber insurance leg into that, it can just help build that holistic approach, right? It just helps solidify you in the eyes of your customers as that one-stop shop, right? You're the go-to person for all things cybersecurity, and incorporating the cyber insurance leg can help do just that. And going forward, our real goal as a partner of yours is to help you ride this wave of business. As we talked about, cyber insurance is a driver. Excuse me, insurance in general is a driver of compliancy. And we feel cyber is no different. So, how do we help you ride this wave that is cyber insurance as it's continuing to move through the cybersecurity space and really driving the spending in the space? And we're really seeing, this slide is really to make the point that cyber insurance is not going anywhere, right? It's the fastest growing sector of insurance. That's not changing in the near future. By 2025, is expected to be, 23 billion in premiums sold. We're seeing it pop up in legislation as well. States across the board have been acting bills and resolutions for the past several years. California, obviously, being a big one, but we also have other states that are really moving in that same direction. So cyber insurance is really not going anywhere, and ultimately, we could really start to see it become, in fact, potentially mandatory. Right? I can certainly see a future where cyber insurance is virtually mandatory for all businesses across the board. We're already starting to see it, arise across the business space to obtain, business loans and business contracts, and that's just continuing to evolve and move forward. So, how do we come in and help you, ride this wave and tell the story to your clients, tell this holistic story to your clients, but also help what I like to say is overcome a common, not necessarily objection, but obstacle I think that most MSPs face, where they're viewing you guys as as almost an obstacle, right? Almost a burden, something that they have to do, as opposed to being an enabler, right? And you're seeing, a couple of these terms. One that I really like to say is we want to change the mindset of the customers from viewing you guys as their IT provider to their IT partner, right? It's a two-way street, right? Little bit slight pun there. IT, it's a two-way street, right? It really should be both parties coming together. It shouldn't be this kind of constant battle that most MSPs are facing on the day to day, right? Trying to get folks to kind of pull their head from the stand and understand that their risk is real and they need to start taking it seriously, right? So, however, we can come in, help you tell that story, help educate customers, help pull heads from the sand. That's exactly exactly what we want to do. So, what does this look like in practice? I got a couple of case studies here for you. And this case study itself, actually, this whole kind of section, this whole half of the slide is a screenshot taken from the summary page of our application. So this is actually on the page, one of the things that your customers will get to see as they're rolling through our application. And it's just a great way of explaining to them really exactly what we just discussed here today, right? It's an unstandardized market out there. And while there might not be this direct immediate number we can give them in terms of if you get better tools and technologies, it will relieve to such and such, discount. it will lead to reduced premiums, right? So this case study here, being a chemical-based company, worked with their IT. Hey, we need to change that IT partner to reduce their premium by 23%. They did this by upgrading their antivirus, implementing a VPN site to site with MFA, and purchase a phishing and spam detection product, right? So this example, it resulted in a net annual cost increase of about 30 bucks, but ultimately in a much more secure position, right? So you can see how that kind of relates to this image right above. Another way to look at that is the difference between kind of those gold star, the better carriers, right? Versus everybody else, right? So everybody else, yeah, you can go out and maybe find a carrier out there who will offer you product with maybe fewer of those requirements, but you're going to be in a much better spot if you just get some of those tools and technologies in place, and have a more secure environment with that reduced premium. And as we discussed, often better coverage as well. Typically, those guys are the ones offering the best coverage as well. Another case study I like to bring up is, this is how we've absolutely been able to save customers money in the long run. There may be a case where you run into a customer who's maybe already doing these things. But as I mentioned, it's an unstandardized market. So they may already be doing these things, but still be overpaying for insurance just because that carrier is not one who's necessarily focused on this, and not necessarily giving any credit for having those tools and technologies in place. And so just by doing a quick policy review of a company and going out and doing some additional shopping, we can sometimes save quite a chunk of money. This example is a pharmaceutical company that was paying almost 30,000 for $1 million in coverage, right? Which we said the $1 million should not be upwards of 10,000, right? So we were able to go out there. They were actually a fairly large pharmaceutical company, and we recommended actually increasing their coverage from 1 million to 3 million, and we were still able to save them almost $11,000 annually, right? So this is what it can look like in practice. And obviously, $11,000 to a customer is it can be a big deal, right? So being able to save that kind of money obviously also just opens that door for potential other conversations you can have with them about other offerings you have, right? Saving money here can lead to potential spending that money on other options, maybe other tools and technologies that you guys offer, right? So a couple of case studies of what this looks like in practice, right? Once we've gotten that customer to that point where they are willing to actually apply for cyber insurance, right? But what do those first steps look like to get to that point, right? We first have to get them to the point where they are willing to fill out that application, walk through the actual quoting process at the very least. So for those clients or prospects of yours who are ready to go, simply jumping right into our application and just filling that out is the way to go, because it'll walk them through that gap analysis. It's going to be the fastest way to do that. We also have our brand new streamlined referral form, so that after you plug in a customer to our referral form, going to ask if you would just like to go ahead and start the cybersecurity questions for that customer. So really just streamlines that whole process, particularly obviously going to be helpful for any customers of yours who might not necessarily need to sit down with us and have a discussion, right? Anybody that just wants to go ahead and start seeing quotes, I highly recommend just jumping right into our referral form and just going ahead, plugging them in, starting that application on their behalf. There's a nice button in there for you to go ahead, let the customer know that they just need to fill out their business portion for us to go ahead and start getting quotes back for them. So obviously, that's for anybody that's just ready to start seeing quotes and has already gotten, past that, kind of crossed that line. For those that might need a little bit more education, or aren't quite ready, or maybe you're just starting to broach the subject for the first time with customers, that's where our resources in our partner portal will come into play, right? We've got tons of resources. We've already talked about that checklist, right? The requirements checklist that can be used for educating them on the tools that they need. But another very common one is going to be our PowerPoint slides We have a couple of templates that you can use for broaching the subject of cyber insurance or even just educating customers. You can see the example right here on the left. It's really pretty straightforward hey, just trying to get an idea of which customers of mine do or do not have cyber insurance. If they do have cyber insurance, great. We work with a expert who offers free policy reviews to make sure that you are in a good policy. So if they already have one, that's wonderful. Let's go ahead and confirm that they are in one of those better policies, or at the very least, I can give them a breakdown of how their policy compares to most of the other policies out there in the market. And obviously, if they don't have one, that's just, continued education. Maybe they would like to set up a meeting with us. That's where I come into play. I'm happy anytime, jump on the horn with any customers, kind of dig into their cyber risk, discussing, what that looks like. We also have our risk assessment that if you haven't had a chance to check out, I highly recommend taking a look at because that can also be a great way broaching the topic of cyber risk. You can see here I've kind of broken down some of our materials, some of our resources here based on the goals that they address. So if your goal is to educate customers on the risk that they currently face, right? Very common for smaller companies that think they're too small or it's not my industry, right? That's where our cyber insurance risk assessment can come into play. You're seeing an example of it here where we can really start showing customers based on their size and their industry what their risk is looking like. We also have various one pagers that are specific to industry in the partner portal as well. So both of those can be very useful for kind of overcoming that or for that discussion of cyber risk for individual customers. The second one here is educating customers slash prospects on the need for cyber insurance, right? So the first one, the kind of the risk that they're facing currently. This one being more along the lines of, well, why would I even look at cyber insurance? So a couple resources you're going to find are our Myths Busted white paper, right? Overcoming a lot of the stigmas around cyber insurance. Another really good one are cyber incident examples and glossaries. So that's actually going to give you examples of cyber incidents and how insurance would come into play during that incident. So another really great one for educating customers on the ins and outs of cyber insurance. And then we've already touched a bit about the requirements as well, right? It's another area. But all of these kind of, you can even almost see the steps along the way of kind of educating, overcoming that objection of the risk is real, overcoming the objection of, hey, let's go ahead and at least take a look at cyber insurance, and then also digging into, okay, well, what do the requirements for cyber insurance actually look like? So all of those materials you'll find in the partner portal at your convenience anytime. And at any point, if you have recommendations for materials, definitely reach out and let me know. Almost all of the materials you'll find in our portal were actually created based off of recommendations from other partners who thought they would be beneficial. So if you're ever looking for something specific, definitely let me know. It could be something we could create. We have also created this year, officially launched our more tailored approach. So we have all those resources for you guys at your disposal to kind of do with as you see fit. If you want to, kind of do it on your own, kind of tackle it on your own, wonderful. We've got all those resources loaded up in our partner portal to help you do that on your own. If you are interested, we can also sit down and create a bit of a more tailored approach to targeting your customer or prospect base in terms of engaging with them around cyber insurance. And we can create some very tailored email campaigns, tailored webinars, other various co-marketing activities that we can put together to target specific segments of your customer base. So whether or not we do that by, you're seeing an example here of running one of our risk assessments on a group of customers, and our risk assessment kind of automatically organizes them, color coordinates them based on their kind of their general risk and their external posture. So we can create tailored, campaigns for each of those segments. We could also focus in on specific tools. So, if you had a specific tool this year that you wanted to focus on, say you added a new, MFA product to your cybersecurity stack, we could create a nice email campaign or maybe webinar that specifically addresses that and could be then used to target that segment of your audience, or excuse me, your customer or prospect base that has not crossed that line yet, maybe for MFA, right? Or whatever the case may be. And this is where we can also get creative, really kind of sit down and figure out what those segmentations would look like, which kind of segmentations would work best for you and your company. So if you're ever interested, don't hesitate to reach out to me to schedule your first strategy meeting. This is also going to be another level to our partner program. We're calling it the platinum partner level. These will be reserved for those partners who are interested in these kind of co-marketing strategies and activities. All this really is going to help me do is organize those customers, make sure that I can focus my time and energy on those partners that want to do the same, right? So that platinum level is going to be for those customers and excuse me, for those partners that are engaging around, yeah, email campaigns, putting together webinars, actively, submitting customers to the risk assessment, all of these kinds of things based on engagement itself. So don't hesitate to reach out if that would be something that is interesting to you. Definitely reach out to me. We'll set up our first strategy meeting to really dig in and kind of plan out what 2024 would look like and how the co-marketing could uh, um, how the co-marketing path could be laid out. And that takes us to the end. Thank you everybody for attending. Make sure to copy my contact information if you don't already have it yet. Also, make sure to save the date. As I mentioned, these kind of how-to kind of webinars we're going to be having are going to be a series that we're going to be doing. We had a great turnout for this one, so definitely save the date. We're going to be hosting it on Wednesday, June 19th at 1 p.m. So same time. The topic will be ironing out in the next couple of weeks. I'm thinking probably going to be on compliance. I have a couple of really good ideas for the next couple webinars. So I'm thinking the next one's going to be focused on kind of compliancy and how that compliancy leg works with the insurance leg. And I'm hoping to potentially even bring on another kind of co-host from another vendor to come on and chat with us, do some educating on the compliancy side. So make sure to save that date and keep your eyes peeled. We'll be sending out more emails as well as we get closer to that date, of course. But thank you again all for joining. I'm going to be hanging out and answering any of the questions that we had coming through on the chat here. So don't hesitate to hang out with me. I'm just going to be answering questions. But other than that, thank you everybody for joining. There is going to be a recording of this as well. So if you want to share this, just keep your eyes peeled. The registration link, one of the nice things about Crabcast is the same registration link that you use to register for the event, it actually just turns into the recording. So if you want to just copy the link that's up above there, this link that you're seeing up above will actually turn into the recording itself. So we'll make sure to email it out as well, but just to like to mention that because it'll be easy. You can just copy it right now if you wanted to. But again, thanks everybody for joining. Let's dive into some questions. Fernando, so are more cyber liability firms such as yours declining claims? Is true, and why? Thank you. And great question. We even touched on it a little bit. And a great point to make also that if I did not make it clear earlier, DataStream is a cyber insurance brokerage. We're an expert brokerage who works with pretty much the entire cyber insurance market. So we are acting right now as the middleman between the customers and the carriers themselves. One good reason we need to do this is because of the unstandardized nature. So we come in as kind of this middleman who has access to the whole market to make sure we can show customers the entire basically market base and all the options that would be accessible to them. Now, I can still answer this question because it is a stigma that we see, and we did touch on it a little bit, but that stigma around claims denials is coming from two avenues. One we already really touched on, which was the language inside of these riders and or add-ons or endorsements, right? So the language inside those being very limited can result in kind of a battle with the carriers and can sometimes lead to the carriers finagling their way out of paying these kind of riders or add-ons. So not only is it only $50,000 in coverage, but it can also be incredibly difficult to get them to pay out that $50,000 of coverage. So there's a reason those riders or add-ons are like only a couple $100 typically. That's one avenue that this kind of stigma of cyber claims not being paid out is coming from. The other one is the mistakes being made on the application itself. And we even kind of touched on that earlier as well. Helping customers through the cybersecurity questions as an MSP is actually incredibly beneficial because we want to make sure those questions are as accurate as possible. Because as mentioned earlier, come claim time, the carriers are naturally going to do their due diligence. And so if they, do their forensics and do some digging, and on the application, when you applied for insurance, you check the box yes for having MFA in place. But during their forensics, they find out that when the incident occurred, MFA, fell by the wayside. It was no longer, really being utilized. That can also lead to a claims denial. So you can imagine, especially in the beginning here, as cyber insurance, particularly after the pandemic, we started seeing more popularity around cyber insurance growing. Um, some of these guys were just going through when they applied for insurance, and they were just checking the boxes, right? They were just like, "Oh yeah, I've got MFA, I've got offsite cloud backup, I've got all these things," right? Because they just wanted to make sure that they were getting quotes back. Um, and that's where people are getting into hot water, right? They just run through that application saying, "Oh yeah, I've got all these things. I work with an MSP, and I'm sure they're doing all those," when in fact they aren't, right? And that's where people get into hot water because come claim time, the carriers are absolutely going to do their due diligence, and dig in and see what the customer actually had in place during the incident itself. So great question, though. Great question. We got another one from Itza. John, where can I access those top 5 requirements? I would jump right into the portal and I would download the requirements checklist. I would go off of the requirements checklist, and the difference between those hard recommended the controls that are hard recommendations versus those that are soft is a great way to kind of educate customers on those differences between the carriers that are really asking for it, the ones that are going to affect their premiums, right? There's those baseline requirements, the ones that you're not even going to get quotes back, and then there's the recommended ones, the ones that are going to ultimately affect their premium. So I would jump in, and hey, this is actually a great chance since we're kind of at the end here. For those of you who are already partners, you can easily access our partner portal from our website, datastreaminsurance.com. Jump over to partners section and click on partner portal login. If you're already a partner, you're going to hit a verification page. You'll plug in your email and you'll be taken straight to the partner portal here. If you're not a partner yet, you'll just click on join partner program and you'll fill out that application real quick. We got a application for our partners. Shouldn't take you too long. But go ahead, fill that out. That'll come into me. I'll get you approved as a partner. And once you get your approval email, there'll be some instructions in there for you. You basically do the same thing, but after that approval email, you'll officially be in our system as a partner. So you won't run into any issues getting verified and all that good stuff. So, but yeah, I wanted to make sure to show that. That's where you would access the actual portal. And then once you're inside the portal, we got our resources section right there. We got our checklist right there. There's our PowerPoint template. We got our checklist. We got all of our one pagers, some more customer education, all of that good stuff. But great question. Steven asks, or do have MFA but not enabled everywhere. Yeah, so MFA is specifically they're going to be looking at it being on remote access. So folks that have remote access, email. So email's a big one. So MFA on email, pretty much across the board, is going to be a requirement. And then and then MFA on those that have remote access as well as admins is also two other big questions that they're going to be looking for. So it doesn't technically mean absolutely everywhere. It's a good question, right? It doesn't technically have to be absolutely everywhere, but specifically MFA on, yeah, the email system, and then on anybody that has remote access to the system, and any of the admins in the system are going to need MFA turned on. But great question. Absolutely. And that's looking like the last question I got here. I'll hang around for a little bit more if anybody else has any more questions. Trying to think of any ones I've gotten recently. Oh, I can think of one that I recently got. Another thing you all might run into is the difference between insurance and the warranty. And the warranties that we're seeing pop up, in my experience, at least from what I've read, really designed to help fill the gaps between, like, as you're waiting almost for cyber insurance to pay out, which is really interesting because if you were in a one of those policies that we're in, as we were discussing, a pay on behalf policy where they're paying for your insurance, or excuse me, they're paying for the damages right then and there, you wouldn't technically need a warranty. But I could absolutely see a potential need for a warranty in some of those other policies where it's a reimbursement policy, right? Where you're actually you're covering the costs up front and waiting for the carrier to pay you back. So it's an interesting, these kind of warranties have been popping up. That was absolutely one that I've gotten recently, but very different in terms of what they cover. The warranty is typically kind of been designed to give you a little bit of cash flow, kind of in the interim while you're waiting for your payout from your insurance, actually. Awesome. Another question from Itza. During renewals, we do get a lot of clients getting data from their underwriters that says something is vulnerable. Are there any data points on how they actually run these scans? Yes, yeah. So one thing you can do to get an idea of what the carriers are going to see is through our insurance risk assessment. And that is found right in the portal, right here, cyber insurance risk assessment. And what that does is actually exactly what you're talking about. It does the external scan. Oh, yes. And you asked if it's an external scan. Yeah, it's an external scan of the network. So these carriers, they run this, yeah, this kind of outside the network scanning of the domain and anything that might be connected to that domain. So it'll highlight any of the emails that might be connected to that domain and some of the other external things. Even does a They typically even do a little bit of dark web scanning and stuff like that. And our risk assessment actually does the exact same thing. We try to copy exactly what the carriers are doing so that you guys could even potentially get at, kind of get ahead of that and understand what the carriers are seeing when they run those external scans. So yeah, I would recommend jumping in there and testing out one of those risk assessments and seeing that mapping that's done, because we actually give you the whole map. We'll highlight any of those vulnerabilities that would pop up for the carriers. We'll highlight any of the open risky ports, and we even give you nice links over to the NIST website that'll explain the vulnerability and all that good stuff. So yeah, I highly recommend testing out our risk assessment because it'll give you exactly what you're looking for, kind of that insight into what the carriers are going to see before we actually officially apply, and it's so that we could potentially even iron out those red flags before we go ahead and apply, and before it hits, the carrier's actual scan. So great question. Yeah, I highly recommend our risk assessment for that because it gives you exactly what you're asking for, a little bit of insight into what the carriers are going to see when your customer would apply for insurance. That way you can get ahead of it and not get caught off guard by, yeah, potentially a bunch of vulnerabilities suddenly showing up, which it sounds like happened to you where they came back and were like, hey, why are all these vulnerabilities popping up, right? Yeah, our risk assessment can be really useful for getting ahead of what the carriers are going to see themselves. Absolutely. Are there any Andre, how does a client prove the coverage of the protections they have in place at the time of the incident? Right. The so when they apply, they lean on the risk, or excuse me, the questionnaire, and then when an incident occurs, the carrier is going to have a forensic IT team that will come in to run the initial forensics on the incident itself, and that will be internal, right? And at that point, that team is going to map out that internal posture of that customer at the time of the incident, right? They're going to do their due diligence and digging in, finding out if MFA in place. If they said yes to having MFA in place, they're gonna do their digging, figure out if that was actually in place during that incident or not. And if it was not, it can absolutely lead to a claims denial. Yeah, yeah, great question though. They're absolutely going to do their due diligence. How do services like vulnerability assessments and penetration testing fit into the requirements? They were not on the checklist, right? So the carriers, yeah, right now are not doing. They're combining the way carriers are basically leveling risk or addressing risk. When a customer applies for insurance, the carrier is going to decide, okay, they are sitting at this certain level of risk, we will decide to cover them or not. The way they're assessing this right now is a combination of that external scan, which they know and we know is by no means an end all be all. They combine that with the ever lengthening cybersecurity questionnaires that are attached to their application. So yeah, it's really the combination of those two things, right? Is they run this kind of external scan to get an idea of what that posture potentially looks like, and then they really lean on that questionnaire for the internal posture. They don't, yeah, they're not leaning on anything like a vulnerability or a pen testing right now. It is something I theorize we could see occur in the future. I could absolutely see a future where eventually maybe carriers start actually requiring anybody that applies to roll through a pen test first, or things of that nature. Is that for sure? I don't know, right? This is speculation at this point. Could I see it happening? Potentially, yeah. Right now, though, it's not what they're doing, and that's one of the benefits of having a partner like us, right? Is to be able to keep you up to date on what the carriers are doing and how they're treating your customers when your customers apply for insurance. So, yeah, great question. Could it be in the future? Yeah, possibly, absolutely. I could see it, right? Right now, they're not because they want to also make it kind of easier for customers. There's still a lot of skepticism on the customer end if the carrier comes in and is asking them, hey, before you apply for insurance, we're going to need you to upload this tool. We're going to need to, run a full range of scans on you, things of that nature. So they're trying to get around that with these ever lengthening questionnaires. So we could see it change, but hasn't quite shifted yet. Do you see yeah, SOCs or SIMs or incident response plans being part of requirements in the near future? Yes. This is something that I would refer to as kind of being on the bubble. Similar to what EDR once was, kind of on the bubble, and is just being asked for more and more. Particularly incident response plans are popping up more and more. It's one of the reasons you will find in our partner portal, our incident response plan builder. We actually created that for that very reason. We started seeing it pop up on some of our carriers' questionnaires, and so we wanted to at least have an answer for that for some of our customers. So always like to set the expectations. It's nothing super crazy, but at least can give your customers a nice organized way of plugging in the needed contacts, who's needing to be contacted in what order and all that good stuff. So it's absolutely both things that are we're starting to see pop up on the questionnaires. Absolutely. Yeah, great question. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the it's a good question to also mention. That's the other area, that we can really come in and be a benefit, we feel, to y'all, is keeping you up to date on what we're seeing in terms of evolution from the cyber insurance side of things, right? Because it is, insurance moves at a snail's pace, but right now cyber insurance is kind of moving at a blazing snail's pace. Lots of changes and stuff happening year over year, things like that. So, however we can best, keep you guys up to date on all that and helping you guys navigate that, help your customers navigate that. It's what we're all about. Yeah. Well, great questions, everybody. That was awesome. Again, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Make sure to grab my email. If you have if you want to jump on the horn, you want to figure out a good strategy meeting, figure out for 2024 how we can, best start pulling some heads from the sand. Definitely let me know. Oh yeah, I just saw your question. Yeah. I think our thoughts will be Wednesdays. We're gonna try and do one every quarter, and so it should be, yeah, three months from now, June 19th, 1 p.m. should be a Wednesday. Yep, absolutely. Cool. Awesome, everybody. Well, thanks again. I'm gonna have to hop off now. Gonna move on. Got other meetings, of course, and all that fun stuff for the rest of the day. But again, yeah, if any questions pop up, don't hesitate. Reach out. Give me a phone call. But truly, we're here to help you navigate this space, but ultimately help you use these requirements. So use insurance as what it's done in the past, right? As a driver for adoption and compliancy across the rest of the stack, right? Across the rest of cybersecurity. No. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.